So with that, I'd say let's kick off our meeting. I don't know if there's a need to do roll as usual for this meeting, or is this? Okay.
Yep.
Well, I guess can we please take roll?
Yes. Lee,
Present.
Sabula,
Present.
Lyra,
Present.
Scott, Roberts,
Present.
Yang,
Here.
Johnson, Hesse,
Present.
All right, present 6.
Well, I guess we had really just one thing on the agenda. We had committed 1 hour of time to tonight's discussion. Was really around the DEI metrics that were shared with us 2 weeks ago now, approximately during our last meeting.
Ashley, if you don't mind, we still did put the land acknowledgement approving the last minutes
Oh,
on there. So just to kind of go through our normal protocol. Sorry
okay.
about that.
Okay, well, I guess I didn't pull that one up.
Okay.
So I guess let's go with I don't have my land acknowledgement in front of me. But I guess if we had, let's move into, go ahead.
Courtney pulled it up if someone would like to do it.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Courtney. So we are gathered here on the lands that were originally home to the Menominee and Ho-Chunk nations. And as such, we honor both the Menominee and Ho-Chunk communities and are grateful for their stewardship of the land and waters. We acknowledge these ancestral grounds as sacred and remember the complex history of settler colonialism on these lands and the effects that persist today. We commit to a restorative and healing relationship of the original inhabitants and our community. Thank you for pulling that up. With that, I guess, could we move into
A minute.
approval of our minutes? Do you have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
I can take roll.
Thank you. With that, I guess we'll take roll. There's
Lee,
Aye.
Sabula,
Aye.
Lyra,
Aye.
Roberts,
Aye.
Yang,
Aye.
Hesse.
aye.
Thank you.
Okay, then we did put citizen statements and public comments on the agenda, and I have not received a request either.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So I guess with that, I'll go back to where I was starting from, and thank you for reining me back here. Just kind of eager to jump into the discussion. And really, this is to discuss the proposed DEI metrics that the city administration had put forth, asking for our approval of in order to move this to council. I think it was presented to us with, we needed a bit more time to look it over, I think, as was right, and to put some more thought to it and to collect our, ideas and perhaps some feedback on what was shared. So in order to kind of make this hopefully a very useful and meaningful discussion, I just would kind of open it up to any of our committee members if you have maybe some initial thoughts or comments. We didn't really decide what would be the best way to provide feedback. I think a discussion is a good place to start, perhaps followed up by some written comments. I think that would be useful, but we can figure that out as we go along. But if there's anybody that would like to maybe just sort of share some of the initial thoughts or ideas, please feel free.
Last time we talked about this, I kind of browsed through this stuff and I was looking at the measurements that are in place here. And I have a couple of questions about this because they were not answered for me yet. Number 4, public access to facility improvement. I'm not quite understanding why that's there because I'm assuming there are buildings are up to code and law in terms of access to people with disabilities. Unless I'm mistaken.
Mark, do you want me to comment at all? I'll comment and then Mark can add in. I think, we have recently done a facilities improvement assessment for the entire city of Oshkosh buildings. And, you know, there are several buildings that are compliant, but not up to the most accessible, I guess, options. As you may know, many buildings are grandfathered, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have the best accessibility. For example, City Hall itself, our ADA compliant bathroom is on the 4th floor.
Okay.
It's the only ADA bathroom that we have. Now, people can go up the elevator and get to it, but it's certainly not ideal. So we actually did partner with a company to help us look at a citywide plan to improve our facilities. And again, I know Mark can speak a lot more about that than I can.
Yeah, well, there's 2 elements to this that are suggested, and I would ask departments to take a look at that individually. Some are facility heavy, where facility analysis would be good. And given the study that was done, I think a good measure would be progress towards eliminating some of those barriers, because it's not just that. It's a great point, Joaquin, because if you're just talking about facilities, it's like, well, if we've done the assessment, do we need to do any more? But there are some facilities that have a lot of issues, and can we target ones that we think are the most used, perhaps, or that are frequently used? Big discussion was with transit, for example, and anytime we're made aware of a problem in the transit area that we haven't solved, that's brought to our attention, generally we try to jump on those right away. But I can tell you, not all of our bus stops, for example, are accessible. But we do know who some of our customers are, and when they bring it to our attention, they're kind of our watchdogs for that. We jump on that. The other half of this is program, and I think that's a little different. And that's where I think some of this would probably be more relevant. Think of senior citizen programs, for example. If the program itself isn't accessible to someone, that's a challenge that we need to overcome. So I think it would probably be more on the programmatic side, but it could be facility wide.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I think these measurements are supposed to be objective. So, and I guess that piece wasn't, I wasn't aware of that. So that makes all the sense in the world. But in thinking about that, the objectivity of the measurements, the last 4, I'm a little confused because they seem to be pretty subjective, actually, because this is based on perceptions. And, it seems to me that's not going to be a very clear way of measuring where we are, in terms of understanding diversity and inclusivity. So, if they're not objective, then what is the utility of these measurements? I guess that would be my question. If we were thinking about how many people we have attracted and employed, how many people, we're serving who are of a certain, of different, a background, et cetera. Those are more meaningful measures, but this particular piece seems to me very subjective, and I'm not sure how they would be valid measures.
Okay. Michelle, you want to take a first comment?
I can give some thoughts from an HR standpoint. And one of the things we do in human resources very often is an engagement type study. And I think this is similar to that, where we want to see where we are from how people are feeling in the community. And through our efforts, we want to see that number continue to improve. Unfortunately, inclusivity is not overly objective, but the results of these types of surveys, I think, really help us see if we're going in the right direction. And, are we getting more and more participation, and are we getting more people feeling as though they're welcome in our community through, our programming and other efforts. So they're really a measurement over time, in my opinion, to show that we're going in the correct direction.
Okay, I'm still having a difficult time to see how they would be valid in general. I think, again, if we know how many people we're employing, how many people we're housing, how many people we're serving of the diverse background, they would be more objective. But, it's kind of getting the flavor from the community. But, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but if you ask a bunch of, nationalists, are you discriminating? And they say, no, we're not. Where is how you measure that, compared to that, so my point is these are not very objective. And so I'm trying to figure out how do we, if we're going to use 9 measures and 5 of them seem to be very objective in terms of, there's some tools to do those, but these other 4 are more of a gut feeling kind of thing. And I'm trying to figure out how to, to me, I think I understand the thought behind it. Are we more inclusive? But the word of mouth is not going to be, a valid measure. And I'm not, it's going to be seeing the people in the community, seeing the people employed, seeing the people, all these things are going to be much more valid than this. And so I don't know if these were the best things to put down there. I guess that would be my point, that I'm, that doesn't seem solid information for us.
Yeah, my only response is that, yes, I agree with you that those are not necessarily objective. They're more perceptive measures. And those, I think, have to be taken in the context of everything we're doing, because if we only had those, we wouldn't have much to work off of. Ironically, though, one of the first 2 was what was really interesting about that. We've had this measure in our annual citizen survey dating back to 2009. And a couple observations. One, I think, is to your point. About 5 years ago, we had a little changeover at the university, and the council members they asked the professor about the profile of our participants, because it did not reflect the demographics of our community. It was largely older, it was largely whiter, and some of the comments, it's like, can we get a broader cross section, a little more accurate with the remainder of the population? And when we did that, we improved a little bit, because the university really worked hard, and our numbers in those categories went down. So to your point, it's valid. It depends, how that perception is depends on who does it. So that's one half of it. But at the same time, the council used that even before we started to get a more diverse group of people to participate, especially with the first one, our numbers were down. And even the group that was largely older and whiter said we needed to do this. We needed to do a better job. But we followed up that year with the question about a diversity coordinator. So we had, oh yes, we need to improve in this area, but no, we don't want to hire anybody. So it was interesting that observation was there without a solution that was proposed. So I've kind of liked it in there, not that it is the be all, but do you leave it in there as something that we've got 10 years, actually 13 years of data to kind of track and see how it's going. And I think you do have to look at something like this over the course of time, because a simple snapshot really doesn't tell you much.
No, and I agree with that, but I guess my concern would be that this is more window dressing because it's not objective. And so does that dilute the other measurements who are more valid? Or can we figure out another measurement that will be more substantial for us to actually put our teeth into than other than this? Because really, it depends on the audience, it depends on the mood, actually depends on the mood of the country, because if the country thinks that we're not diverse, that's what the population is going to say, but it's not going to reflect in the reality of
Yeah.
what it is. It's again, looking around. I would even throw in that is are people feeling welcome to the community? If that might be a little more objective, and that's questionable in terms, but the other three, just from experience, and of course this is all anecdotal, but working in a larger community, when we talk about things that we have to look in terms of, are we prejudiced in our approach to things? Most people say, well, no, we're not.
Of course not.
That's not reality. We are, and so that's my point, that this is, I just don't want it to be distracting from the other measurements were more valid. So I have a hard time putting them in the same category to say, these are our 9 things that we need to look at. This should be a side thing, valid in some points, but not to the point that we're measuring how we're doing in general in the community.
Well, I appreciate that. And to the degree you can suggest others that you feel are more objective, I think that's the value of having this committee look at those things. So if you've got other ones in addition, I would suggest that we add more objective ones to give those a little more weight than subjective ones.
Right. And I think too, being able to measure the perceptions of the community is very difficult. And yes, we can measure how many people we hire and such, but that really doesn't help us understand the perception of the community, and is the community becoming more welcoming. So I think, we want some internal facing objectives, as well as something that, again, helps us understand the perceptions of the community. And I agree with Mark. I mean, if there's any ideas, but I would like for the city to look inward and outward, right? Into our processes and what we're doing, but then also outward to how we're affecting the community.
So
the only thing that I'm, I'm hung up on a lot of things, but to the point is, I think, one of the issues that I'm questioning sometimes is, I don't think it's just the drive of our government to decide how we do this. It's the community in general. It's, the businesses in the community. All these have to be participants in how we open our city to be inclusive and doing all those things. The part that baffles me a little bit is, if our community changes because we attract more diverse population, the effect that there will be, the government will be more inclusive because they're going to be having more people of the different backgrounds, employed. There's going to be more involvement in committees, but they're going to be more involved in all kinds of things. But it seems to me like we need to attract them in a bigger picture, and this feels more like we are looking internally, and then from there we're going to grow. And it seems to me that would be, putting the cart before the horse. We need to get people to the city, to the diverse communities, to start being part of it, part of the city, part of the community, part of the businesses, part of all those things, and that's when I think about these things. When we talk about this might give us a false sense of security. Yes, we're being more diverse, but yet it's not reflected in the community in general, with businesses and all those, housing and all those things. That's the part that I'm concerned about, those last 4 points.
Shay or Miang or anybody on the phone, would you have a comment to anything? What's the discussion currently? If not, one of the things I would like to suggest is, Michelle, and I think there is, as you're noting, I believe, value in the qualitative perceptive data, both of employees and community. So I think there's room for sort of that qualitative assessment and analysis of the surveys and what it is, but possibly condensing them so they're not, perception of inclusion. I mean, of employees and community. I just don't know. I mean, maybe it could make some either separate measures, or I'm not sure. There's a strength to using the same measures of sorts of inclusivity and the perception of it for employees and the community. Because I think to Joaquin's point is, theoretically over time, you have a greater diversity in the community. If you're doing things right internally, that should start getting more feedback and additional feelings or perception of inclusivity. But really what I'm trying to get at ultimately is I'm looking at three words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are separate. They have separate meanings, right? And I think the approach and the way we select measures needs to cover those bases. Now, it looks like, there's some measurements in this around diversity to some extent. It's like, oh, okay, essentially general demographic data. There's some deference to this inclusion and the perception of it in these last four questions. Like, okay, there's some value there, but are those the right questions? Is that all that should be asked? I'm not ready to say necessarily, because I don't even know what the surveys are. I don't know what we're comparing it to. I don't know what the targets are for any of these. Some of this feels a little, maybe not transparent enough to actually make, like, well, maybe these are the right things, but what are we like measuring it? What are we comparing it to? And what are the baselines? Like I'm having a hard time really understanding what the plan is, what the direction is, what are the goals, what's the achievement. It's like, okay, yeah, general sense of inclusivity, sure. Equity and equitable measurements and goals. Like, well, I don't know, how does it look differently internally for promotions or performance ratings? Like, I don't know, some of that's internal, but it's also like, how do you do your hiring? Like, we've got a pretty diverse community. Like, is there a way to compare how diverse is our community and what does that look like for city government and all the departments? I just find that I personally have a hard time understanding what the direction is with some of these measures. Like, what are we going to do with them? Like, but again, I think trying to break it down in that framework of which ones are touching on diversity, which ones are hitting on equity measures, and which ones are touching on the perceptions of inclusivity. So there is a spectrum here, but I'm not sure that it was quite enough to really just say, yeah, these are good enough. Stop there, please.
I'd like to piggyback on that. Actually, this is Angie. Well, at this time, like, my greatest concern is that, as John has referenced the GDEIB, and I think that's the wonderful, wonderful resource to guide our work. But just reading through that manual, I see that in that model, really without the foundation, the authors and the 120 some expert panelists don't suggest moving beyond the foundational level, or looking at other internal, external, and the bridging groups until that foundation is at a level 3 or higher. Now, at that foundation, there's the vision. I'm going to try to go off memory from this because I'm driving. Vision, systems, and leadership, I believe. I don't know if the city is there. I was thinking, like, does the city have a mission statement, a DEI statement? Other than our DEI committee mission statement, does the city have one? If not, that's probably a good place to start. I think, again, like, I would endorse using those standards, but I think, I don't know, I think these metrics might be, we don't have some of those foundational data points or the foundation to look at some of the other metrics until those foundations are covered and solid.
Thank you, Angie. And I think I'll just add to that, as part of me, as I'm feeling like I know what our charge is, and we're supposed to kind of meet with the community and we're sort of seemingly a bridge to some extent. But, ultimately, who's going to keep, there's just so much that needs to be done and coordinated. Like, to Angie's point, the foundational pieces, I think, are still, there's still enough work to do. Like, I don't know, we can make numbers of recommendations, but then what happens with it? Where's it going? Who's going to work on it? Who's going to continue? And in this document, they even talk about an internal diversity DEI committee. Well, that might be a good idea, but we haven't even, and maybe it will help facilitate dialogue between our committee, which is, and stuff going on in the city, but I don't know, like, what is the plan? How is that gonna work? Because in my mind, it also has the potential to create further division if there's not any chains of communication here, which, it speaks to this, I think, maybe some of the foundation. And again, I don't want to like hold this up or anything, or like sort of be a stonewall a process in any way, but I don't know. I know I'll stop there again, but I think with Shay or Yang or Beth, if anybody has something else that you would care to add, please do. And Mark, I do promise, I think I have lots of things written, but saving everybody the airtime. I don't want to like read things to you. So I mean, I think we can combine some shared documents and suggestions that would be helpful to parse through, but get to that later. But I'll stop.
I think that I pretty much shared at the last meeting my thoughts about being sort of surprised that so much had been done without us having any knowledge. Not that you needed our permission, but just that we had no knowledge of what was going on, really. We can't change what has transpired. I'm okay with the plan. I think that as long as it remains fluid, that we're not approving something that is absolute, that you can continue to modify as we work on ours, and hopefully they'll come together in tandem.
Yeah, I view the work that the committee's doing with this to be a very living document. I think from a data collection standpoint, you want to go through a whole year, and you may look at, and we've done this with our citizen survey for years. After a couple of years, you look at a measure and go, that's not really a very valid measure. It's not really telling us anything. And I think that was kind of what Joaquin was getting to a little bit, is like, what are you doing with it? If you don't do anything with it, or maybe Ashley, you said that too. If you don't do anything with the measure, what good is it? So you have to have some value to that measure. Excuse me. Yeah, I think looking at these annually, tweaking them, clarifying them, throwing some out, adding some in, I think that's all legitimate. The document that we did in 2009 for our first citizen survey is quite a bit different, but we've let it evolve so that we see how things work or don't work before we don't throw it out completely, but we put it on our watch list and say, this isn't really valid anymore. And I think as this committee matures, they're going to get a lot more savvy and wise as to what things are more relevant to us too. So I absolutely view this as a living document.
Can I say something on this? So last meeting that we had, I think I was not part of the meeting, but I had a little time just going through just snippets here and there. Yeah, it is, to me, there's something that I feel like they were done wrongly. For example, starting with the survey itself that happened in May 2020, that brought us to this document itself. I don't know if we were aware about this survey itself. It happened in 2020, December 2020, when they initially did the survey itself. And I think by that time, our group was already formed, right? Do we know if we were aware about that survey? That's the biggest question. And if we're not aware about it, I think it brings us to where we are right now, or this conflict of, there's a conflict already. But again, moving forward, I hope, like everyone wants, like maybe we could be involved in some of these surveys moving forward. I think Mark Roloff had like a time schedule that we have to hit our target. I don't know whether once we approve this tonight, let's say we approve it tonight or tonight, do we have opportunities to throw in some things as we go?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I would suggest that if you want to suggest other things to add, I would say let's add them first because uh, to make the data valid, you want to collect it for a period of time. So I would suggest if there are some other ideas that we share it amongst the group. And if you want to add a few more items, take out some others. For example, whether you like or don't like the citizen survey, we're doing that. And we've been doing it for 13 years. So we're going to keep collecting it, whether or not you want to accept that as one of the KPIs, that's entirely up to the committee. But I think it's valuable to still collect it. And, you know, the issue about the December 20, we were working before the committee was created on bringing in a consultant to do training. The survey was the suggestion of the consultant to get a feel for, she wanted to get a feel for how our organization was doing. And there was a lot of hesitancy in that, and with the results of that survey, which really targeted what our first training was going to be, to kind of demystify diversity, equity, inclusion as a topic. So yeah, I have an obligation to move certain things forward, even if I'm a little ahead of the committee. And I don't think the committee was at a point where they could have. Now the committee's they're more mature. The committee's, you know, wiser to these things. And I think the more input you want to provide, the better. And so if there's something you want to add, you know, Ashley said he had some ideas. If you want to circulate that amongst the group and get some reaction, I think that's great. And anybody else, because you might hit on something that we're not necessarily connecting with at this point. You know, I'm still challenging the departments because some of these are admittedly a little general. For example, oh gosh. Well, it's probably more along the lines of, say, income or equity. One of the things I've suggested to Public Works, for example, is we have an extremely objective street rating system. How do our streets look? It's 1 through 10, 10 being great, 1 being lousy. How does that go in various areas of the city, poorer areas of the city? And can we identify, we can't get it down to the block or anything like that, but I think we can make some general observations. That I think would be a good equity measure. And I think we need to come back to this committee if we've given a general assignment to the departments, like an equity measure. They don't get to create it and then, oh, that's my measure. It's they create it, and we're going to circle back with you guys and say, my PASER rating example, do you like it? Do you think it has a good equity lens on it? So I would love to come back with more refinements based on your input.
And I think what I'm hearing too is the actions behind the objectives or the goals, right? I think that's where I feel, Ashley, you're saying you don't know what those actions are. And right now, you know, we're concentrating on the measures, right? How are we going to measure it? But then behind those measures, there's got to be actions. And I think that's what you're asking a little bit, Ashley.
Well, there's that, but the reason, I mean, like, all right, like we could be measuring these things and they could just tell us everything's hunky dory. So, like, why are we even putting it on there to begin with? I don't know either. I mean, you all are looking at data and there's transparency factors here. Like, I do believe, you know, to your point, Mark, we could offer suggestions, but again, it's just spitballing. We're just shooting, you know, just guessing. We could put out all kinds of ideas, but it'd be a waste of my time to do so, in my perception, because you might have already nailed it. You might already be doing this. You might have already asked these questions. My suggestions for employees and potential things around hiring or recruiting. Well, maybe you're already doing it. Maybe you already have a streamlined process. Maybe you're already using some sort of blind process to look at qualifications without any potential bias. You know, maybe you've already instituted certain things. I don't know. And so part of me is like, I can offer these things, but it still feels like it might not be most effective. And yes, it's going to be a give and take, and I get that. So I will put out my ideas, and we'll continue to learn from each other. But yes, I would like to know more about like, why were these things chosen? Like, what were some of the things that you're trying to do internally? Not that we need to know all the dirt and details, but like, if this is a lot of this, it's some of it's targeted internally, some of it's external. Yeah, there feels a little disconnect as to like, well, what were the reasons? What were the numbers? And based on those numbers, what is your kind of general goal? You know, like, because you're telling me we've been doing this citizen survey for 13 years or 10 years. Well, okay. Who's looked at that data? What charts are you looking at? What are the results that you're surveying and studying to say, okay, this has been our trend in these main areas as are being reflected in these particular things you might be looking at. Like it just seems a little, I don't know what to do with it. You know, we can help refine it and add more to it, but there's reason behind it. I would like to understand. Yeah. And what are we?
I think you start with something. I mean, we put the citizen survey together before we had a strategic plan, before departments did strategic planning, but it was get a pulse on where the public is. One of the professors at the university who started the survey used it to identify how council reacted and did they make changes to the budget? Because originally the purpose of it was our budget were we prioritizing things properly in the budget? And that was right after 2008 with all the floods. So it was very easy for people to say the infrastructure is lousy. Okay, it was a valid point. And so we took a look at quality and importance. And again, some of that is subjective, but we've got really good data that supported investment in infrastructure. And the professor was able to demonstrate where council had reallocated dollars. And I can tell you the council used it very seriously to make budget decisions. So I think you start with the data, and maybe you guys are having a chicken and egg discussion here. I can take either side of that discussion. Do you create goals and then create measures to follow those goals, or do you do measures and say, what do we think about these things? Are we what objectives, what goals do we want to reach? And you may tweak the goals or you may tweak the measures after that. But there is a little bit of chicken and egg, and sometimes I think you just dive in, you just start doing one of those, and I think that's what council did. I don't want to put Councilmember Wojciechowski on the spot, but because he, this is his first year on the council, and originally the council that gave me the goals, Aaron wasn't on, for example. So, but they did have a discussion in terms of where they necessarily wanted this to go. So I think the latest goal they gave me was, let's get to the next level. Let's start refining these things. So I don't know, Aaron, if you have any opinion or thoughts on the chicken and egg type of argument that we're bantying around here. And is it appropriate to wait on goals before we go to measures, or are you comfortable with measures and then we can tweak as we go along?
I mean, I think either for me is fine. I would just like to, I think part of it too for me is council needs a little bit of direction too, because I think they want to, before they start making too many decisions as it pertains to DEI, they want to see what changes need to be their focus. And I think the measures help that, whether we just stick to internal measures now and then wait for our DEI plan to kind of direct the more outward measures, or it really comes up to the committee. I mean, from my position, I'll support either direction. But from council's perspective, I think for us, it's a little hard to start making any decisions before we, have any direction.
Interesting. That's a good distinction you make between internal, external actions, Aaron. Again, because if I were to say, look at the percentage of permanent employees by gender in comparison to the city of Oshkosh, So we talking to strictly population? We have X% of women or people identify as being female in the city versus how many are employed. But I would just say drill deeper. Like, well, what is the point of that? Like, are we looking at considering like, is it the number of women in leadership positions within the city? Is it the number of women in, some type of, project lead? Like, I guess I just don't know, like what you're trying to achieve by looking at that. Because if it's, what are we trying to do with those points is really what I get. So, and
Well,
again,
I assume what you're trying to do is get the
fine, but then let's break it
population of our
apart.
employees in
Yeah,
line with our overall population.
Okay, again, those are assumptions. I can read between the lines and fill in the gaps or just kind of come up with my own. I assume it's going to be used for this. So, okay, I guess I'm just feeling a little like we can add some more details, some potential other suggestions. Um, I guess really a part of me, the last thing I'll say, it's really from where my heart. It took how long, and these were the things that were presented to us. I guess is feeling a little bit like, and if we're supposed to trust that this process is going to get more transparent and that we're going to have a better way of working, I'll take that. But I am a little skeptical because I will be quite frank. I've been asking for ongoing updates and reports about what was going on with this process pretty routinely. And we get some high level, really high level updates, which is fine. I appreciate it. But yet we were asking, throughout our existence, like, what is that? What kind of questions? Like, just some transparency. What was going on internally? You hired another consultant to do internal work. That's great. Do your city business. But we can't have any influence over or oversight, or not even oversight, or any suggestions. And then this is where we're at today. Well, is this going to continue? I'm sorry. I just feel a little skeptical. And I feel like I'm not hearing anything other than what we've already heard. I think this is great. If you need us to approve it so you can start doing your work internally, great. Okay, well then let's make that the point, but
The council gave us direction to work on departmental measures subject to your approval.
yeah,
Independent of that, they also created the committee and asked the committee to develop a strategic plan. So there are things that they've asked us to do that we're working on, but I think the intent was that the committee was going to be working on the strategic plan. Then this came forward because this is something we were directed to bring to you guys. So we brought it to you in good faith that we were asked to put these together and we brought them. It was not intended to keep you out of the loop. That's what we were directed to do, and we followed that directive. I think getting it, the committee had its goals, and we were given our goals. So now our job is to bring it to you and say, here's what we've put together. We'd like your feedback. I don't think it was a lack of transparency. The purpose of this was to have the committee take a look at it, not create them. The council was very clear. They didn't want the committee to create the goals, but they had to approve them. Now, in the process, you might create some because you might not think that we're producing goals that are very relevant. But the idea is that we're trying to create some measures that we can start taking a look at and start evaluating ourselves. Are we more reflective of our community from a hiring standpoint? Are we equitably delivering services in the way of streets, which is just one example that I can do off the top of my head. But I think it's vitally important for the committee to continue its work on getting a strategic plan done, because once you get the strategic plan done, then you can take a look at measures in a whole different vein and add some depth to those measures. But our directive was to develop these measures and bring them to you, and that's what we've done.
and thank you, Mark. I don't mean to be too adversarial, but again, I don't know how we're going to come up with a strategic plan if we don't even understand what the city's doing internally to a level that's going to allow us to provide things and advice and guidance. So we'll just continue to work on this. I'm not opposed to it. It's a feeling, it's a sense. It's awkward. It's not been a smooth process from my perception. Hopefully it will smooth out. hopefully if you guys get a DEI coordinator internally, that person will be able to build a bridge and be that go-to person, because absent having a permanent diversity coordinator or somebody within the city, like it's a city function. It's going to take a lot more than an advisory committee and a consultant to figure this stuff out. That's my opinion. I mean, it truly is. And I don't see personally, it's just going to be a wonky process until somebody gets brought on board. That's my 2 cents. And I'll engage for as long as I'm allowed. So I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add to this conversation, please do, but we are going to be running short on time. I said we have an hour, going to kind of stick to that. We got about 12 minutes left. Any comments, please raise them.
The only comment I'd like to add is that at this time is I would like to know, like, your data source, like, other than the Oshkosh Citizen Survey, like where are you drawing this data from? I'd like to look at that data, read it, analyze it, because for us to come up with a strategic plan, we need, to be very strategic about it, we have to source it from credible, valid data. And I don't know, I mean, Mark, I understand your point of, like, let's just get started somewhere, but I don't think that's making informed decisions. And I was always under the impression that we were going to get data from each of the departments. And as you admitted, these metrics are very general. So I don't know.
Well, I think
go ahead.
No, I think the 4 that Joaquin brought up at first, those are subjective. They're very general, but the other ones are a little more specific. So I would disagree with you on that. I think if you take a look at the first page, those are very specific. Those are objective. They're measurable, and I think they're useful. But if you have other goals in mind, we might develop more measures based on what goals. But I think this committee is very capable of creating a strategic plan. I think they just have to commit themselves that that's what they want to get done and focus on that as their primary objective in the first, in the near future. This is just something that we were directed to do. I think you can go and I think we can work on these things and from a department standpoint, and you can work on a strategic plan, and whether that results in things such as the creation of a diversity coordinator position. I would argue that if we hired a diversity coordinator, they say, what do you want me to do? I want to hand them a strategic plan and say, we need to implement this. That's my feeling. So I don't think we disagree, Ashley. It's just more what step you do first. And I think the council asked that we get a committee to do a plan first.
Well, and I think we might disagree on some things, Mark, but that's okay. But one of the things I would note that I think is important that Angie noted is if we're going to have a strategic plan, the data source, we need to be operating from the same data sources. We need to be looking and responding to the same information. And I guess that's the level of transparency that I'm understanding, because I don't know what you're responding to, and I don't know what these things are really in response to, because they are open and vague. To some are very specific, okay, but it's in response to something. So I guess to the extent that we do all need to be drawing from the same data sources and understand how they're being utilized, like, so if it is just strategic, the citizen survey, if that's a primary tool that is being utilized, okay, well, with that I understand is public. We can dig into that, but if there has been any assessments of that, any analysis of that, well, that would be awfully helpful for us to have if there has been. If not, okay, we'll have to do our own analyses somehow, in some way, but I guess that I think is a very valid point that Angie brought up. If we're going to be able to do anything effectively and hope that our strategic plan that we put forth is even adopted, even in a fraction of it, I think it would be helpful if it's based on the same data sources and same data points. So to that extent, that would be useful to understand from our perspective, I believe. If there's something more than the citizen survey that we can work off of and the results thereof.
A good question that I have here is, I agree with what Ashley has been 100% with what is being discussed here. I do have quite a number of suggestions on metrics. Who do we send them to? Do we send them to Ashley or do we send them to Michelle?
I can certainly share any suggestions with Mark and his team. A lot of people do send things to me and Ashley when it's related to things we want on the agenda and such. So, you know, that would certainly work as well. But I would love to be able to gather all of your suggestions for Mark and his team.
Okay, we'll do that.
Yes. So please do that. Just send it to myself and Michelle. That way we can have some record of it, and then that would be great if you're able to help compile that.
Awesome.
We'll send it up, and maybe that would result in, something useful.
I got quite a number of them with me right here, so
I know.
That's the input I was looking for tonight, was to get those things.
Well, all right.
And
Hey,
to add those things would be great. So
Yep.
Do you
if
want me
you'd like us, we could compile those and share them with the committee.
Do you want me to read you two of them, for example?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's what I was expecting.
The first one is I wanted to know the percentage of dollars spent by the city with the certified Wisconsin supplier diversity programs. That's the SDP. That certifies minority-owned businesses or disabled, that serves the disabled and the veterans. And then I also wanted to know, for example, the OPD, if it shares its demographics in terms of the data it collects on makes those stops. Also, I wanted to know if the city provides opportunity for the public to learn about the cultural diversity in the Oshkosh and builds this as a shared identity. So quite a number of them I'll share with Ashley and Michelle.
Yeah, because what we could do is we could just compile them together and get them out and attribute them to everybody so everybody knows, who contributed what. And one of the things I think would be incumbent upon us to do in the case of the suggestions you've made, Mouche, is take a look and say, are we capable of gathering that measure? It's got to be measurable for it to be a good measure as well. So we could take a look at those and see if that's something that we could do. And if we can, or if we already do to a certain degree, then it's like, how does that look as a measure? One of the things the council asked us was like 5 to 7 measures per department. So the one in police was specific to police, and that's good because police will need measures. But and then there was what was the other one again? The first one you mentioned?
The minority-owned businesses.
Oh, purchasing. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that would be actually in administrative services, John Fitzpatrick, one of his other divisions, not the HR division that Michelle leads, but the general services division. So that would be, and I don't know the answer, but is it measurable is a huge part of that, because if we don't have that data, it's going to be hard to measure. Then the question is, can we modify something to measure it? And if we can, again, you could put the same lens on these questions as you do with the ones that are already on the sheet of paper. What goal is it? And I think the goal there is, are we improving our ability to purchase items from disadvantaged minority women-owned businesses? Again, I don't know the answer, but those are the things that we're looking for.
Would it be possible to maybe do like a Google Doc so that all these suggestions go in there, and maybe we can chime in to see we agree, we don't agree, or throw some other suggestions so that we avoid having to discuss again, well, we're gonna go through 30 and I like one, but I don't like 10. And then, we tend to really go off the wagon when we start doing those things. So if we can have a document beforehand with all those and put them in there and maybe put a check mark as to which ones are a priority for you. And then we can discuss those next time and say, this is what our offer is, or if it's something that the city can do, because again, if it's not measurable, then we're going in the wrong direction. So we have to have something that's workable for the city.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Absolutely. We can put, as we gather them in a Google Doc on the shared drive, which I know Heather sends it to you guys every single month, the link to our shared drive, so that everyone can see what has come in. And I don't know if we want a deadline for people to go in and look and put their feedback in. Some of it's going to depend on when we receive those measures. So
I think a deadline is a good idea.
Yeah, I think we should do that. Give ourselves some amount of time. Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks?
Yeah.
That way we can roll this material quick enough.
right. So our next meeting is January 24th, just to kind of give us a deadline to work toward, right? So what if when do you think we want to gather information by January 10th?
Yeah.
And then feedback by January 17th?
I think so.
How
Yeah.
does that sound?
Yeah.
That way
Sure.
by the time, well, actually, Ashley and I usually get together 2 weeks ahead, but by the time we get together, we should at least have all of the suggestions in.
Mhm.
And then you guys can have a week to populate your thoughts. And then obviously we'll have those ready for the meeting on the 24th. Is that a plan?
Yes.
It's fine by me. We can certainly provide inputs, but this part about measurable or not, I would like to add a column to that chart, if it is such a thing, as if not, why not? And what can we do to capture that? Just initial thoughts,
Sure.
because I think that will help poke holes in some of like what's happening currently.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
that's fair.
Right. So once I get the suggestions by the 10th, I may need some time with the members of the city so that we can get that all included as well.
The only
one
other,
question that I wanted to add up is, let's say we submit all these suggestions by the deadline. Would the staff go through them and review and see which one they're already doing, as Ashley was talking about? Because we may throw in quite a number of suggestions. So it would make sense for the city staff, if they're already doing some of those things, to check like, oh, this one is already checked like that. Can they do that?
Yeah, I think what we can do, I'm just looking at the calendar, with the holidays always screw things up, but
I know.
but I'm going to have a staff meeting on January 5th, so I can just make everybody aware that you have a self-imposed deadline of January 10th, and then we will circulate it to departments and sort it out, because police don't need to see something about public works and vice versa, and we'll sort them out and get them out. And first question is, do you already measure this? If the answer is yes to that one, we struck gold. If they're not, I guess I would also say not just a matter of why not, but is there an alternate suggestion that could be made that is either measurable or easier measurable? Like, Mushe, the ones you brought up about police, I don't know. It depends on what level of detail. And I know that is a limitation with some things because we follow some standardized reporting requirements. But we'll take a look at those, and then we can say, yes, we can, no, we can, or here's another way to look at it. I think the intent is there you want to take a look at, are we, potentially discriminating, or are our numbers there? I know we do some measures. I just don't know all of them, and I don't have them memorized, so I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver there. And then we can come back by the 17th, hopefully. I mean, it's a big ask for 1 week, but if we sort them out by departments, then they're only looking through their stuff, not a whole, universe of them, and they have to find it. They got to sort through them. If we can sort through them pretty quickly, Michelle, I think we'll be in good shape.
Well, and
I'm sorry,
I was
before
gonna say-
hello,
Oh.
before we further this conversation, I'd like to voice that I'm very uncomfortable with the timeline, especially being the holidays. I don't think that, one, January 10th is enough time. Secondly, I don't think that any of us should be focusing on this during the holidays when we should be really, I think focusing on ourselves and our families and loved ones. So I'd like to voice that we postpone this till our February meeting. And if the committee is in disagreement, I will go along with it. But I would like to just put that out there that I think this would require more time if we're really going to be thoughtful and intentional about it. So I'd like to propose that we push this back till February.
Yeah, well, that is a proposal. I don't hear a specific motion of any sort that we are even moving towards here. So I think, first of all, let's kind of, and thank you, Angie. I do understand where you're coming from. But again, I will just add, we put in as much time and effort as we can, to some extent. So anyhow, as volunteers. So I guess we
I
aren't.
think there's some wisdom in that observation. That would also give us more time to look at things and give them more in depth. So I wouldn't be opposed to it. I know that, last month it seems like it was rushed. I'd much rather see the committee comfortable with any recommendations they bring forth. So if the committee wanted to move to February, that'd be fine. I would ask you split the difference and give us a little as much time to react as you prepare. So maybe like the end of January for the committee, and then that'll give us a few weeks before the 28th. That'd be my suggestion if you want to go that route. But I do see the wisdom in Angie's observation.
I got a question over that. If we move this to February, so on our January meeting, what are we talking about? Because
January, we will start to work with Alonzo on our strategic planning.
Oh, okay.
And there will be a heavy focus on that, I have to believe, because it's the first of the year. That was sort of our intent to really dig in there, and that will perhaps inform some of this work as well.
Perfect. That works.
I'm totally fine postponing it till February.
Well, again, if anybody does have suggestions already, like I know Mouche has several, I'm certainly happy to look at them as they come. Even though obviously no hurry, but those of you who already have thoughts, I certainly would love to see them.
Yep.
So what we should set the dates for February then as well. What are our deadlines for February?
Well, what I verbally here was, how about by January 31st, we have all of the suggestions? And then that gives the city some time to review them, so that we can have them available and sent to you before the February meeting. Actually, we'll populate that Google Doc as we go anyway.
January 31st is good for me, but I'll make sure that I keep on forwarding them as soon as we can.
Yeah, earlier the better.
Right.
But it's because that'll give us more time. I would anything you can get to us soon, especially if you've done some already. That would be wonderful to give us a head start. But like Angie said, next 2 weeks aren't going to be the most productive. So, but we can hit the ground running in January, and that'll give us time. And then if we can spend some time on the ones we already get, then the ones we get towards the end, we'll have more time to devote to those.
That makes
And
sense.
some of these ideas might spur other ideas. That's the beauty of that whole sharing thing with Google Docs is you'll start to, oh, I got an idea based on what I saw.
I got one question for Michelle. Is it possible for you to send us a list of all the departments so that as we think of these metrics, we could have something to look at?
Sure. I can give you a high-level organizational chart so you can kind of see how the city works, what the departments are.
Right.
That certainly isn't a problem. I can send it and put it out on the Google Drive.
Thank you.
One of the other thoughts, Michelle, might be because sometimes departments don't tell you the whole story, Mouche, because you think something's in there and maybe you think of fire and you got a pretty good idea, but other departments, that might be good to also share with them the results of the citizen survey, because what we ask there, we don't get as departmental as we do service and function. And that might help stir the creative juices as well.
Right. I think we did share that last year when it occurred, but I will go back and refresh and resend.
Okay.
Yeah, because anything that stirs those creative juices, I think, is going to be beneficial to us.
Absolutely. We'll get that out as well.
Okay.
Anything else you guys need, I mean, feel free to just email me or call me as well. If something that you think would be helpful, I'm here most of the time.
Okay.
Hopefully they'll
Thank
give
you.
you some time off, Michelle.
You're off.
Well, we are a bit over our time that we had scheduled. I appreciate everybody's inputs. Mark, hopefully this was helpful. I know it wasn't a specific list of things that you may have been targeting, but we do have them written. I know Moshe has some, I have some. I'm not sure if anybody else does, and we now have additional time to provide that.
Council gave me more time too at my review, so this is okay.
Well, honestly, as
And I think focusing on the strategic plan and and moving that forward, I think is going to be important, and that will be that's another key goal for the committee, getting that strategic plan done. I think I certainly am looking forward to that. I think that's going to help a great deal. If I can just take one moment to do a little brief advertisement. Twice a month, I do the city manager's report show that's on city cable TV and on YouTube and everything. Because we don't have a council meeting typically the last fourth Tuesday of December, we do a special show top 10. What I did in there is, I identify some programs or things that we're doing that I think are interesting for the public to be aware of. Sometimes things behind the scenes are not really on the front burner. Number 2 on my top 10 was our diversity, equity, inclusion measures. Part of the reason the top 5 get extra time at the show. So you'll see that, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to basically spend some time thanking you. I know there's some frustration sometimes we're not doing enough, but you're slowly churning forward. And I think getting the strategic plan done is going to be a huge leap forward for you guys. And it'll take some time, but you'll get it. And it will be so valuable to me as city manager. So I sung your praises and kind of like, please get it done. So I'd encourage you to watch it, and any feedback you can give me on that or any of the top 10 would certainly be appreciated.
Actually, Mark, I could do a quick commercial as well. Unfortunately, we did lose James Price on the committee due to restrictions of the makeup of the committee. So we do have a couple of openings. So if you do know anyone, you can apply for boards and commissions on the city website. And of course, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me as well. But we are a couple members short, and I would love to obviously see some of those applications go to the mayor so she can appoint more people back to our committee.
Good to know. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we got some work to do, so.
Yeah. Well, now that we are resourced, we found a resource, we have Alonzo hired, we know we have a budget now, we have something to move forward and work with. This is all very helpful. So Mark, we'll make some progress for y'all. No worries. Okay, I guess, yeah, with that, we have, can we, motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Merry
Come on,
Christmas,
everybody.
everyone.
Merry Christmas.